Okay, I welcome Akash Ji to the podcast. It's an immense pleasure for me to get him inside the podcast because I felt one of the most genuine people in order to give what's actual engineering approach should be. I think Akash Ji is the best speaker that I've seen. He's a senior SEO in Cloudera, and now I present you Akash J for this podcast. Akash Bhaiya, introduce about yourself.
Hey, hi Vishwas. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Uh, a lot of you guys might be having questions regarding engineering as well as how the approach is in larger software organizations, as well as lots of nitpickings and doubts and how to take up few of the baby steps in the industry. So here to just share of knowledge what I know of.
Yeah, thank you, bro. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast. And let me just start with a question.
Yep, yep. Go ahead.
Okay, are we bound to the decisions made by an algorithm today?
If you ask me on an honest ground, yes, and to a certain matter of fact, no as well. So it's kind of gray area where you don't have a proper white or a black. You are bound by the decisions made by your algorithms because take it your social media, take it your shopping, take it your decision making apps which you go in, say for example your shopping sites. So you are hit with your recommendations. Each and every site that you visit recently will offer you cookies and is tracking the users in a way, whether you know it, whether you like it or not. So you are being tracked, your likes, dislikes, and everything is kind of being profiled at some point in time. uh, this does should not affect the way in which you take up the decision in one aspect as well, because you have a humane nature added onto the decision making abilities. Say for example, your parents used to buy Onida products, TVs, or anything of that sort. So that is an innate nature which is imbibed into the consumer market. So even though you get a Xiaomi TV or whatever the recommendation may come up with, but that cannot take out the deep rooted what I can say, the feelings which you have, and the uh, consumer trust which the brand has already put in. So in a way, when individuals are put in to make that biased choice, it's always depending on the individuals. But on a practical ground, yes, these choices are controlled by an algorithm.
Yes, I have been seeing Cloudera products and a lot of things. Cloudera Impala, it's making a huge change now. So there
Yeah.
are because in data science, obviously software packages might not be important, but to get our lives easier, it's making us easy in terms of getting the work
Correct.
done and everything. And I just have this doubt, like, who has the
Mhm.
greatest share in the technology world? Is it a startup? Is it any company which you can point out to, or else is it any person who is
Mhm.
giving an algorithm, or who is giving a software package, or else who is giving an open source software also? Who is
Mhm.
leading the technology today?
Uh, if you ask me in that regard, like who is leading the software world, so it's pretty much open market if you ask me. But the larger giants in the industry play a major role. So say take Slack for example. Slack was doing great, and it was giving a tough time for its competition. And at the end of the day, no matter how good they were, how excellent they were performing in the market, they were acquired by a larger giant like Microsoft. So even WhatsApp, for that matter of fact, got acquired by Facebook. So it's like a big fish eating a small fish kind of a scenario. But the open source world as we know of it is kind of becoming very much dynamic and very much uh, supportive as the days progress. Because the history of Linux, and how it actually bounced back, and even the mightiest of the mighty like the Microsoft as we know it are uh, you know not able to escape from the bare truth that Linux performs much more better and faster when compared to Windows servers or any of the other OSs. So that's how it is. So a simple rule of the market round now is adapt or perish. So if you are open to the changes of the market and the needs of the customer, you are going to survive, and you are going to persevere in the market. If you're adamant, like few of the companies, you're just going to perish at some point in time. Not today, not tomorrow, but at some point in time. So that's the whole point.
Even Windows is coming up with Ubuntu softwares now as a dependent
Yeah.
kernel. As a dependent kernel, like I have this tendency of looking at tech news today. Like, which
Mhm.
news really made you feel that this technology, if it gets implemented, it's going to disrupt the market in the future?
So there are a lot of them. So that's a hard question, I would say. Um, since I follow technology and the aspects very keenly, what I believe is, uh, when we come to the personal choices, because if you toss the same question to another individual, he might come up with a different answer. But for me, it would be Tesla, because they are bringing the locomotives, they are
Why?
bringing the environment. That's the reason they are bringing the locomotives, they are bringing the environmental factor, and they are also integrating technology in a very sweet package. So it's kind of appealing to most of the leaders, as well as with the existing work frame of the market. So what they have done with their products is they're inventing onto investing basically onto pure sciences, because they are increasing battery capacities, and the charging times, and reducing the stress on the resources. And the second one is with with very minimalistic emissions coming in from electric vehicles. They are having a huge impact on the environmental factors, where most of them are driven by IC engines. And the third one is the beautiful integration of artificial intelligence, as well as image processing, which is imbibed into their Tesla cars, where it can be autopilot mode, or it can be with the existing 20 plus sensors which they use in their cars, and how the safety is more emphasized onto a customer. So that is where I feel they are kind of changing. That is from a products perspective, but from a single software, or from a hardware level perspective, I think quantum computing would get me excited, or up onto some levels. But we are far away, and the days are too far to be more betting on that particular field.
Yeah, even when you told me Tesla, I still remember there was an FSD computer which was released even the mid of 2019, because
Hmm.
Tesla was fed up of Nvidia, which gave the same general purpose GPU hardware, which it was of no
Yeah.
use to them. It was of no use to them because their computation is much more faster. Like, I'll
Correct.
ask you one question, because FSD
Hmm.
computer wasn't truly a new disruption, because it
Hmm.
was relying on on an old set of hardware which Nvidia tried to give for the world in order to give the gaming properly. Now
Hmm.
Nvidia became a general purpose hardware, as in GPU, everything. Do
Hmm.
you really think so? Code written today will be future referable?
Uh, yes, to a certain point, because we cannot forget the history from where we came from, because whatever the baby steps which we are taking will lay the foundation for our future. And no, to a certain part, because even companies like Nvidia are being open to changes right now, with the RTX cards which you see, with RTX
Yeah.
3060, 3080, and 3090. So they are open for changes in the manufacturing line, and they are making their GPUs much more efficient, as well as power efficiency is also being emphasized upon. So even they are kind of being uh, listening to customers. And when you basically bring out Nvidia, I always go back to the Linus interview video, where he just says fuck Nvidia. So that's 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 the way it is. So if you go back and search in Google, so he is so fed up with this hardware level companies being very closely coupled with the manufacturing part and the OS, that Nvidia plays nice with your Windows as well as with your Intel guys. But when it comes to Linux, it's always been hard, and companies are making it hard for Linux to come up with. And as the days are progressing, so we do see a lot of Steam games come on top of your
Cloud
Nvidia
games, cloud
processors,
games.
cloud based games basically, I would say. But the support is not till that point yet. And with Windows being bulkier day by day, and Linux being uh, thinning out and shading out too much of unused purpose code and fitting exactly into the user's use case. That's the sweet spot. So that I would like to say on the NVIDIA part.
Yeah, you pretty much commented a lot against and regards the open source community. And it's not about open source people just going after one Nvidia card or anything else. Of lot of open source communities being enthusiastic about those cards, everything is fine.
Mhm.
Is the debug today still in that level where it can be a solvable bug, or else is it still a fad in order to get something new, or are we still waiting for something new to come for debugging process? What's your view on it?
When we come to debugging, it's kind of innate process. So unless and until you're writing code, and unless and until you have a specific purpose for that code, uh, it's a human part where you are coding. So you are about bound to get into syntactical, semantical, and all the other stuff. But as you progress, there are intelligent IDEs which are coming up, which eases the process. But there, when we come to bug fixing or complete debugging based on the environment, then human efforts is still needed. And unfortunately, we are trying to move with the automation part regarding the debugging as well. But it's kind of missing the whole purpose. Because say for example, you working up with as a student, you do not have much of a value for the two decimal precisions. But someone who is working in a jewelry shop, or on a merchant level, they might have a lot of value given the current gold rate. So the precision which you want will not be relevant to the other guy, and vice versa. So it's completely dependent on use case as well as the market driven business decisions. So anything which is in the share market, if you're say for example JP Morgan and Stanley's Bank or Berkeley's Bank. So what they basically do is they have these huge infrastructures set up where they have invested a lot into something called as algo trading. That is, algorithms basically trade for them. So say for example, you have a particular stock, and if you want to just make 20% gains, and the algorithm is efficient and intelligent enough to detect the previous patterns as well, and the existing benchmarks. So based on those predictions, the algorithm is going to just dump millions into the market. And
Business
with
intelligence.
business intelligent, so basically that algorithm will perform at its best when it is analyzing the current trends, and also it is making a lot of profit. So that's kind of an example for your greedy algorithm, where the system is more optimized on kind of more focused on how to maximize the profit. So in places like those, debugging is of given of major importance, and it's really important for them, because they are dealing in millions. And this is all handled by their computers. So they need to have great engineers who can perform all these activities with minimalistic downtime, which we say MTTF and MTTR, and all these things actually come into picture.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool way of actually giving out business intelligence suddenly to the debugging process. Because that I have never expected
Yeah,
this
so
BI aspect inside the debugging aspect. I
yeah,
never.
if you're spending, if you're basically spending too much amount of time on your debugging, and your system is still lagging and bugging, and your time to market is being affected, so you're basically losing money. And that's what companies are looking at right now. So it becomes much more relevant, and it's a real world problem as we speak.
Yeah, you told a lot on BI, and you told a lot on other aspects of what technology can be. Are compilers making
Mhm,
differences today? Because every company is behind one or the other compiler, maybe in
mhm,
different departments. But compilers, are they collectively, are compilers
mhm.
making any difference? Or maybe an interpreter, maybe.
Okay, so compilers do make a difference to to some extent, but with the hardware level advancements which we are having, so probably they are marginalized. So what say for example, you have Intel 18 C++ compiler, or GNU own C++ compiler. So there's nothing much of a difference which you basically see, but how few set of instructions are handled and how they are optimized based on specific tasks which they basically do. That's the level of optimization which the companies are looking at. Uh, so say take the best example of your PUBG, which contains most of the modules written in your C++. So the compiler speed actually has a uh, part based on your existing runtime, or playing experience, but that is kind of overthrown by your hardware level compatibility. Because if you are running PUBG on a very high end phone, even though your compiler is not that great, and it's around 80% efficiency and not around 90 or something of that sort, but still that limitation is covered by your hardware level aspects. Because with a faster UFSC 3.1 storage, it would be much more faster to read the data from your uh, storage part from your mobiles. And also with mobile GPUs being integrated into the Snapdragon architecture, so that is on a much more faster scale, where even the computational errors or recomputation which can happen can also be masked at some point. So we are at a point where we are trying to optimize based on hardware level solutions, because with the recent advancement in the technology of manufacturing, when we surpassed Moore's law. So that's the major point, or the milestone which I would say all of the companies are behind the hardware level implementations. So both of them go hand in hand, your software as well as your hardware. If you write a shitty code, even though if it is running on fastest supercomputer, it's gonna crash, it's gonna be crappy. But if you are trying to be super precise, and if you are trying to save much of the cycles in terms of CPU, or if you are trying to do that, then I would say don't go in that route, because you're already in a place where your hardwares are much more capable when compared to your older generations. So when we were back in undergrad students, so in the year 2011 and odd, so supercomputers and all those things were kind of buzzwords, and they were kind of great to us. So I think I remember going up to IISc to see one of their supercomputers and stuff like that. So now coming back, fast forward to 2020, and it's like a span of 8 to 9 years, where if you have an Amazon AWS account, and you can spin up a supercomputer level compute engine with the tip of a
Set
button.
of codes.
So yeah, basically it depends on your GPU cores, on your CPU cores as well. And uh, you're basically going up to petaflops. So that's the amount of hardware level compatibility at which we are today. So with that, I think the 2 cents on that would be to concentrate on your coding part, but not to get too deep onto completely optimize it or make it 100% uh, super strong code, because that does not exist. And at some point the hardware level actually kicks in.
Yeah, you told about a lot of hardware level and also about the software packages. If you were in
Mhm,
the same undergraduate
mhm,
or 2011 and odd days, and you had seen the same wrappers, packages, and also the plugins which you are seeing today, what would be
mhm.
your reaction?
I would be super thrilled, and trust me, the things which we could have done back then, even with the current internet speeds which we are having, that would be phenomenal. Uh, I think it all trickle down to the education system as well, where a particular student is given much more exposure on how the things are, and how exactly they are going to learn. And it's not the same teacher and the whiteboard or blackboard model which used to go around. So as Elon Musk said in his one of the interviews, we go for college to have fun, we have other sources to learn. So kind of re-quoting that. So we have so much materials online right now. Taking the example of this pandemic itself, Coursera is offering you free courses. So you can go ahead and learn from the best of the best universities across the world. And you're also getting free courses from LinkedIn. you're getting great discounts on Udemy, where great instructors are coming up onto the platform. So I personally think that it is a point where we just introspect the education system on which all of these are kind of based on. So what I would say is, if you're trying to communicate to students at a very grassroots level, instead of just writing a simple for loop onto the board and just asking them to do it over and over and over again, so why not make an implementation model of it? So I think I completed one of the courses from Stanford University, where they have something called as Carol, where what it does is, it's a simple mowing robot which they have kind of designed based on Python. So you are supposed to go through a set of tasks in a set of maze, which is a controlled environment, I would say. So it is supposed to pick up a beacon or a particular thing, and it is supposed to do the same task over and over and over again. So that is the effective and the most easiest way to come up with either recursions, or with looping structures, or with whatever the examples it is. So it's not the same when we were undergrads, when teacher used to come in and ask us to debug a program and write it on top of the blackboard. And I think those are the days gone. I do have the perception that still a few of the colleges are still doing it, but as I said, it once again trickles down to the whole education system. And I do have seen few of the very much effective faculty members who kind of take it upon themselves to come up with demos and try to debug a few of the things while they are going ahead. And practicality is what actually defines it, I would say. So if I was a student, and if all these exposures were there, then trust me, I would have been on the craziest of technologies, because we were kind of tech junkies at that particular point in time, going through hardware assemblies, and going through the packet level analysis of a few of the things in Wireshark, and the stuff like that. At the time when there were no much resources available. So say for example, if you wanted to do anything on NS2, that is Network Simulator 2, during that time, so you used to have one or two tutorials, and your faculty was the one who you banked upon. But now, if you search for any of those topics in YouTube, so probably you will find up at least 10 to 15 of those videos. So that's the extent to which technology has progressed.
Yeah, there is a lot of disruptions happening in the industry. And also,
Correct.
I think these days, due to the AI, right people are getting right opportunity.
Hmm.
I feel so that technology is going somewhere else. But what
Hmm.
happened in the pandemic? Many people lost job. Many
Hmm.
people went bankrupt. And what happened to
Hmm.
the software industry, and what will it be from now on? And what's your view on what can it be in terms of getting the potential engineers to the industry, and also and what can be the potential of the software industry from now on?
That's a pretty tricky question, I would say. But if you ask my perspective on it, so a good engineer is going to land up a job irrespective of a pandemic or not. I have seen a few of my friends switch from companies even during the pandemic, getting all the hikes, getting all the perks, and basically it depends on the engineer. So if you are going back to the same level of audacity, saying that my parents wanted me to be an engineer, so here I am, I did such and courses, and I should get a job. So it's not gonna help you. And while you're picking your job, or picking up your branch at engineering, be more precise and try to see if you can live with this job. Say a guy who picks up mechanical engineering, so you know the trend, right? Royal Mech Macha, Royal Mech Macha. So that's gonna remain the same unless the students are well educated. I'm not trying to say that one domain is far more greater, or the other one is down. But even if you are having a cross relationship with other branches, say a guy who knows at least 30% of coding and mechanical knowledge, he can program the CNCs, and he can go forward and excel in his own field with help of computer sciences. Because the world which we know of today is, kind of run by computers. So unless and until we are not coming up with that interdependability, or intercourses connection, or cross course connections, which we basically say, um, we will not basically succeed, and computer science will just remain as a tool. So a tool is useless without a user and a particular use case. So that's the advantage. And coming back to the question, or circling back, so in this pandemic, it has shown that, few of the applications and the companies, their true potential. Say for example, the Zoom platform which we are using. So most of the people in IT, they know that Skype was the whole thing when back in 2012 or 2015. So Skype did everything good, but it did not survive. Even now, a few people use Skype, but when you compare the audio and the video qualities, and what are the transmission losses and stuff like that which you face in Skype, so that's not compared with Zoom platform. So they are the new kid around the block, and they did everything right, and they hit the nail on the head. So that's the advantage. And how Zoom shares have grown is by more than 500 to 1000 folds, all thanks to this pandemic. Even teachers, even students, and uh, anyone who is working even in the government sector has started to move to a virtual meeting, which is kind of offered at free cost or on a paid basis. Either it can be Google Meet, or Go Meetings, Zoom, Teams, you name it. So these industries have kind of emerged as the true torchbearers during this pandemic, and also enabling people to connect with each other, which plays a major role in situations like these. And the next part is, of the question which you asked, is how is the trend going to happen um, going forward. um, so that's once again depending on humans, because if you ask me on a personal ground, I used to work for Thomson Reuters at the earlier days, which a financial market analyzing company, and which provides its own products. And during that time, at the earlier age itself, I switched to big data, which was kind of booming at 2000, 16 17ish kind of a thing. And I was the lone
Even
engineer from
blockchain
India.
also boomed at that time.
At that particular point in time. But the major difference between big data and blockchain is, blockchain did not provide a proper use case, or how it can be used. So that's the major drawback for blockchain. But when it comes to big data, it's just like the machine which the sugarcane guy uses to churn out the juice from the existing sugarcane. So that's the whole idea of big data. You pass on your data, the machine does its churning, or whatever the activities which you want to do it, and you will get the processed data as the output. So that's the most important thing. But blockchain was kind of great, distributed. It has these advantages. But wait a second, who else in the world is using blockchain? Only for bitcoins? No, that cannot be considered as one of the standout use cases. And there were other medical uses as well, when network hospitals could be connected in a blockchain fashion, and a single user's data could be accessed with multiple peers within that particular chain model. But those are at the theoretical level, but there is no practical implementations which are kind of leading examples at that particular point in time. I think the technology was good and the algorithms were bang on, but it lacked the maturity to attract the market and be implemented at a very base scale. Coming back to the question, so I was the lone engineer from India. So um, if you run into issues, if you're getting a difficult ticket, or if your system is going down, so you had to build that competency that you are the lone warrior. No matter what, no matter, you might get help after 2 hours, but you are the one who will be facing the bullet. So that kind of triggers the reading aspects in you, and you tend to go forward. So I just kept on continuing with that, and completed my MTech as well. And after that, currently I'm pursuing my PhD. So it's kind of a never ending journey. If you stop your learning, you're as good as dead. So that's what I personally feel. So never stop your learning. It's not like, you finish 10th, you finish your PU or your 11th and 12th, and after engineering you're settled and you do the job. You do the same thing repeated over and over again, and you're going to make money till the end of your life. Those days are gone, and that's not the way in which the IT field works. And there are few of the opportunities or positions in even in IT which are not that much demanding, and which are kind of dependent on usual manual calculations or manual process driven. But I would say if you're a hardcore computer science engineer, try to avoid those things, because it's gonna suppress your own potential. So always remember, you chose computer science for a reason, right? So that's coming back to point one on choosing your topics on engineering in first place.
Yeah, that actually clears a lot of doubts on how an engineer needs to choose his profession today.
Yeah, it's
That's
it's it's not the field like, your dad wants you to be an engineer, and you're just going in and trying to do on one of the streams. So it's not like, you're getting easy and you just go ahead with it. So at least try to research what this particular field does, and how exactly it is going to be relevant. So interdisciplinary is the need of the hour, if you ask me. So a guy who is doing BSc AG will require computer vision at some point to identify, a leaf disease, or what's the
cassava
uh,
leaf disease in Canada.
yeah. So you have those templates coming up, and trust me, the outside world, outside of India basically, or the European countries, and the American countries combined, are very much open for these interdisciplinaries. But when we trickle down, it's working up in your silos. Say a commerce guy will never get a chance to work with, computer science related stuff. He basically might use computers to do tally, where he does credits, debits, and stuff like that, and that's end of road for him, and he does not uh, think forward how to do it. And when we trigger that interdisciplinary actions, it's going to be of much more use, and we are going to revolutionize the way which we know of it.
Like there is a lot of complexity involved in getting the secure system as in system architecture itself, because
Hmm.
Hadoop is being involved. There are a lot of ETL pipelines, ELK pipelines, and there are RPC communication protocols which are just moving in and out of the cloud infrastructure.
Hmm.
And microservice has
Hmm.
really made the architecture of cloud less complex compared to before. What was the trend before the microservices? Do you really
Correct.
think so that development process is still going to be like, after 10 years I'm not going to start developing, I'm just going to start implementing? Is there will be a full stop, or else there will be a stop in the process of development? What's your view on it?
Development is not gonna stop at any point, Vishwa. So it's gonna change to a larger extent with the SDLC cycle as we know it. That's the software development life cycle. So basically, your requirement collection and everything is gonna be same, because you cannot start without a proper uh, destination in place. So it would be just wandering around. So you need to go through that collection phase, and you need to work with the business units. But instead of the older ones, like we used to go to waterfall model, go to the same flows, and if it falls then go back. So those things are way out, and I think no one, trust me, no one uses those models. And a lot of these words are thrown at will, like agile, scrum, and direct implementations,
Kanban.
and yeah. So what I would say is, it's these are helping tools, but at the end of the day, you cannot change the way it is going to work. So what the microservices and the other micro architecture has brought in is, they have brought the specific problem solving abilities. Say for example, if you take the Amazon example, uh, the payment gateways which Amazon uses is a separate microservice. So that means even if you go from Amazon Prime, even if you go from Amazon.in, even if you go from AWS, all of them will be redirected to a same payment gateway or a microservice. So that kind of reduces a lot of human efforts in terms of coding. So just imagine if all of them had a separate payment gateway access and payment gateway coding part. So it's like going through over and over again the same process. So instead of that, it's just a single call which goes from all these microservices onto the other one. So it's like kind of not reinventing the wheel again and reusing the existing stuff. It might work for few of them if they have all of them well thought in place, like with Amazon. With the newer vendors which are coming up, what they basically try to do is they try to write the smaller microservices. And what they are going up, or the new trend in IT right now, is infrastructure as a code. So if you just take any of the examples with respect to Azure or AWS, what they're basically doing in is they're providing you the platform, or PaaS, SaaS, whatever we used to know. All of them are kind of outdated right now. So whatever the customer wants, AWS is rolling out a new service. If you trust me, there are like more than 200 plus services. It's basically 400 plus, but all of them are kind of microservice, or they might have split up those things into one another. So it's like more on the customer service basis. So you need to know as an individual end user what you want, how you are going to take up all those jigsaw pieces and put it and get your use case done. So that's the whole point. And coming down the line with 8 or 9 years down in the software field, so the older systems are still gonna be there and still gonna prevail. um, Trust me, because banking systems and banking servers which I had seen are running still on 2007 or 2008 code. So there is a lot of restructuring which needs to be done in. And also at the same time, uh, there are cost factors, there are engineering efforts, and also there are business, without business disruption, how are you going to implement it? Whether is it going to be the same as your old one? So all of these things are going to come into picture. So microservices and the newer methods, the less what I can say, less bound companies which are born and brought up in cloud can be easily adaptive towards them. But the guys who are there on their local infrastructure, or who are basically running their own data centers, it's gonna be hard.
Yeah, you talked a lot about how maybe any sort of technology, let it be an agile, getting interference in the technology, it's not going to work. Are you going to
Hmm.
think, are you, I'm just going to ask you one thing at the last.
Hmm.
What is money according to you? Is it the algorithm code, or else the API hardware, or else is the fear of an customer? What's your view on what is the
Mm.
money according to you?
If you ask me, with code, API, algorithms, fear from
Hardware,
customers,
fear.
performance, hardware, none of them are gonna pay my bills. So facts on the table. We are not doing any community service at this point. Whatever we are doing is for the bread and butter of it. So as said by the famous quote, if you're good at something, never do it for free. So remember, you have paid your graduation fees, you have worked up your entire education system to get that degree, and you have basically made yourself competent. So always money has a what I would say, a predominant position when you're going ahead to work. But after reaching to a particular value, it loses its charm. So it's your day to day activities which keeps you intrigued, which kind of gives you that extra energy and the goosebump moments when you're uh, doing or reinventing a few of the things. So that with that aspect, I would say the excitement of going through a new technology, or improvising a particular process as you know it, never ever measure the things materialistically. That I would say, because as fresh engineers, they would have a particular uh, figure in their mind. So say if I get 40,000, so I would be happy. So after you reach to 40,000, then you start to realize that, wait a second, 40,000 is not getting me happier anymore. So then you aim for double of it, so you go till 80. So after 80, then what? 1 lakh will be the magic figure per month. After 1 lakh, then what? One and a half. So it's going to change on a materialistic level. But when you shift your goals and focus on to something which is very much tangible, and which kind of keeps you going day in and day out, so that's going to last for a longer period of time. uh, I think you have also read this amazing book called as Ikigai, the way of
Yeah.
life. So as described by it, so life is conjunction of all the circles. So even if you are very passionate and you are pursuing and you are excelling in everything, without money you will be bankrupt, and you will not be able to meet your roti kapda makan, the basic three needs. And with just money also, you will not be able to satisfy your passion and your inner abilities to rejoice. So all of them combined, you should basically find a sweet spot. And always remember, it varies from one person to another based on their uh, situations which they faced, or their upbringing, or the way in which they think. So your perception of working in IT will be to either make good use of technology, or make the world a better place, or make money, or just to get a good girl. A few of the engineers even have that in their mind as well. But it depends on individuals. But from my perspective, I think it would be the thrill of learning new things, and doing the same age old techniques in a much more faster way, and optimizing the existing thing.
Yeah, you told a pretty apt answer for this entire world to understand money is important. Development is also a part of it, but money is important. Yeah, like, I've been following Kafka since and 1.5 years, probably odd years. I have not been into software architecture before that. I see Kafka being used by Audi for their structurizing the data and everything. Because when I saw LinkedIn hosted as a PubSub before, then Neha
Hmm.
Karkade from LinkedIn coming out with an idea of Kafka, and then she going out and building the Confluent Kafka. There are certifications which are being given by such kind of organization, which have influenced that technology also.
Hmm.
Are those technologies and those companies providing certifications making the community lazy, or else is it really going to help in getting the productive life cycle a much more efficient and a faster way? What's your view on it?
Okay, so I have probably interviewed more than 40 plus candidates. So even if they come up with fancy certification stuff, bullshit, throw it in the dustbin. I'll throw them a chalk or a marker, and I'll ask them to construct an architecture. I'll ask them to solve a problem, because that's what the end goal should be. So if you're getting a flashy degree, and if you have by hearted something and you're trying to reproduce that, it doesn't actually work in the real world. The toppers which you know of in colleges might not be the best engineers out there in the world. So always it's a mix and match of what knowledge which you have and how you implement it. So if you are lacking in either one of them, so you are not basically able to go through. So what these certifications basically do is they kind of provide a benchmark, what I would say. uh, Say whenever an engineer comes in for an interview, and if he says that he has a Confluent Kafka certificate, so then I know that, okay, this guy should be knowing how the messaging in Kafka works, how the brokers basically store the data, and what happens when the zookeeper znode entry goes out for a particular Kafka offset, and how is he going to resolve. So the complexity in which I question the engineer basically depends on the baseline that he's having what I can say, a certification. But as you know, the pros and cons in even in the government or in any of the places, these certifications are kind of morphed right now, and uh, they are also a money making industry. So most of the top companies, if you ask me. They don't give real importance to just certifications. And few of those companies, like service based companies, who has to show a particular manpower, that say, hey, if you give me this project, I have around 200 engineers who are Kafka certified. So your data which is inflowing into Kafka will be pretty much safe, and we will be able to handle it. So those are the places where the certification is going to be of use. But without a practical knowledge of the things on which you are doing a certification, it's of no use. So I have seen multiple people. I think Eugene from Deloitte is one of those guys who has all the AWS certifications which have come out. So in one of the simple conversations with him, so he's a real gem in terms of architectural aspects. So it's not just going through some APC syllabus and performing it and getting the certification, but how you implement them in a problem solving situation and in a real life. So that's gonna matter a lot. So even if you have 5 10 certifications and you have zero freaking knowledge of it, so hey mate, better luck next time. That's all we basically say.
Yeah, you talk kind of conspiracy in the science, kind of which, because without conspiracy, science is not going to work. Without science, conspiracy is not going to work. Like when you are
Mhm,
in a level where software
mhm,
architecture, everything comes into the picture, and you have your general practices, how to learn new
mhm,
technology, new languages, and new approaches for the engineering problem statement. Because I'm very curious that every day technology is coming out with like inch by inch with a new solution, step by step. It's a whole new transformation. The one version of
mhm,
software which might come from the cloud
mhm,
era documentation only might be different from the previous one. Like,
mhm.
what's your way of learning it?
Uh, yeah, unless until you get your hands dirty, you will not learn anything. So that's the first point. And always remember, even the best of the best or the masters, as you know it, in that particular field, also were toddlers at some point. So always take out that fear in you and just jump in. And if you're basically going wrong, or if you're getting stuck, always there's a wonderful community out there who are open and helping each other out. So that's the beauty of open software. So whatever the things which Cloudera packages, so it's basically the open source software which we bundle them up in and give a nice GUI. And if you say HDFS, Apache, Phoenix, Kafka, whatever the
Iffy.
things may be, yeah, Nifi, and all the other stuff. So it's the open source thing or the package which we have taken, and we have made it in such a way that it plays well with other components. It's much more user friendly, and it is easily approachable by all, and use can be used by all. So that's the goal with which Cloudera actually works. So there's nothing super excellent or a rocket science which is going behind the things. It's just packaging the existing open source things, and it can be very very tedious, because all these components were designed with specific set of things in mind. And when you bring all of them together, it's going to be chaotic. And how you control this chaos, and also how you basically support all these products, and how these products play along with one another. So that's the whole bread and butter, which I would say from Cloudera's side. So coming on with the engineering aspects and the existing things, so we have most of the open source committers, which are kind of employed in the engineering team, or uh, in the research and R&D team, who are kind of given a what I would say an inspiration to continue their good work, as well as solve the real world problems. So anything in this world should not be of free, because it loses its value. Say, so take Geo's data for example. There are few people who are friends of mine who I know, who utilize the data for useless things, just because it is free. 1.5 GB is free per day. So it's like giving something for free, and you're basically utilizing it to just fulfill that freeness. So coming back to the point, the committers are kind of kept on payroll from Cloudera's side for the good work which they're doing, and they internally help with the open source world, as well as with the Cloudera's proprietary software with CDH or with HTTP. HTTP is going to be sunset soon. So that's how it's going to go. It's kind of a symbiotic process. The same way with Red Hat as well, with what they do with in terms of supportability, in terms of open source committers. So you need one another. Without the open source world, the product is going to perish, and without the product and the proper marketing and packaging, the open source world is going to perish without a proper use case. So it's kind of playing nice with each other.
Yeah, you told everything has its own pros and cons, and everything is interdependent and everything.
Hmm.
Like, I just wanted to ask you one question. How much
Hmm.
is the influence of the algorithm today
Hmm.
compared to the day one of your work?
Uh, to be more honest, on the day one of my work, I didn't have a clue what I'm doing. So if my higher line in manager, or someone from the senior side would have told me to just open an Excel, copy paste the same thing and just close it, I would have done it happily at that particular point in time. But at that those are the initial days when you're naive and you don't know what exactly the things are and how it is in IT. But as the days progress, you try to bring in that um, you know uh, science aptitude, and you try to optimize the things that you're trying to do, and that is when you realize the role of algorithms. So say for example, you are asked to copy data from one Excel sheet to another Excel sheet, and you're supposed to perform add of ABC and write the output value to the third column. So after doing it manually, you tend to get fed up, and then you go back to algorithms where you jot down each and every step that you're doing. First, go to this file. Next, open the second file in parallel. Compare these particular columns in first file. Compare the second column in the second file. Then merge the column from second file to the third file. Then you're going to add those three and write the output, and that output should be written in your first file. So aren't these pseudocode? These are algorithms, if you ask me. So you can implement it if you choose to, and with Python, it has been much more easier for anyone, and you can automate basically everything. I think there's a wonderful book called Automate Everything with Python.
Yeah,
So that's
Meep,
that's
Meep.
yeah, yeah, that's the one. So it depends on the engineer how they're okay. So few people are okay in opening up Excel sheets and copying it up and doing it on a normal basis. Few people are intelligent and they want to save man hours. They automate those stuff and they just move on. So that's the point.
Yes. You answered a lot in such a way that most of the questions are getting answered, and I'm like, where should I search? Where should I search? Where should I search? And final call is the software.
Okay.
Final call, not the final question, because I still have five more questions to be asked.
Sure.
Is software architecture robust enough today, according to the engineering aspect which has been developed? Because when I see load
Hmm.
balancers, there is a huge way and there is a huge difference. Then what
Hmm.
I study, the same load balancers which was there 2008 2009 is not still the same, but still it's named as a
Correct.
load balancer. How sturdy, rigid is the software architecture today?
So nothing is rigid, or nothing is uh, too flexible in the world. So as I said earlier, everything runs on customers demand. So if you say uh, you're something an architecture less, so you don't basically have the tangibility of where to go in and where to look at it. Say for example, when you take the file structures in Unix, so that there needs to be an architecture from where the trees are coming up and how exactly a file is getting mapped. So that level of architecture should be there, but it should not be completely rigid that this is the only way in which you can do it. So if you take HDFS, that is Hadoop Distributed File System, so that is the implementation of Linux file system. So we saw that it is good and it has its own advantages. So that's the reason why it was kind of taken up directly from Unix and updated onto HDFS. So architecture is something which gives a backbone and on which you basically build your entire next steps. But it should also not be something which is too much rigid, where making changes into few of the things becomes too much cumbersome. So so most of the architectural aspects, what they do is they try to decouple the major aspects, so that any changes in one of the module will not have a ripple effect on the other ones. But sadly, as we know it, you have to depend on few of the things. Say, if you're spinning up your infrastructure on AWS, and we have VPCs over there, what is called as virtual private connections, virtual private clouds. So in that VPCs, you basically have the networking aspects where you create sublans, subnets, and all the other stuff. So your networking aspect, if it goes down on a cloud infrastructure, so it's as good as stopping all your instances and all your resources as you know it. So there, that level of dependency is also there, but it is decoupled. So if your networking infra is down, at least the other ones will also be in a position to take a backup of it and try to resume from where it left off. So both of them are very much important. I think you're on mute.
Hey, sorry, sorry. I didn't
Okay.
start actually. I was actually thinking of asking
Hmm.
you this question. Like, there are a number of parameters which are increasing every day.
Hmm.
Like, Nvidia is going above 10 billion parameters in terms of getting the
Hmm.
deep learning model deployed. OpenAI, GPT-3, lot of things have come out. What
Hmm.
is that factor that we are still lacking in order to get the AGI, artificial general intelligence, into our current world? And also,
Hmm.
I don't feel like machines today don't get the insights of what things are happening. You can give an
Hmm.
image to a baby, it can say hundreds of things by the glimpse of it. But the machines, even though Dharmendra Moda is trying to build TrueNode technology in IBM in the Almaden
Hmm.
labs. It's going to be something huge. But what
Hmm.
is that factor that we are still lacking in order to get the AGI to this world?
Artificial general intelligence, I think we are long way ahead. We are basically at the normal general intelligence part. So um, people had the perception that in 2020 we'll be having flying cars and all the other stuff. So that is just being too optimistic. So just ask this question: since the telecom or the technology boom began, how much fields have we improvised upon? So I think we should be in a grateful situation that we are able to go back to age old concept of 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, where artificial intelligence or machine learning were coined, but they were just theoretical concepts, because we did not have the practicality or the required data set to go through it. So the answer to that point is, uh, in the current generation we are having a huge burst of data because of social media, or with respect to the changes, each and everyone are ready to go ahead and give their data freely. The second one is we are collecting more data because the storage is becoming much more cheaper when compared to the earlier days. So that is the reason why you see your phones having more than 128 GB of storage, when we were there back as kids, so we were struggling for
12 GBs.
128. Yeah, 128 MB. We come from 90s kids, where we are bound by megabytes in terms of phone storage, and we,
Uh,
we we were happy. We were happy with 1100s. Now the kids, everyone wants an iPhone. So that's the technology difference. And the next one is with the communication aspect. So earlier we were stuck with 2G, 2.5G, 3G was a big boom, but now we are heading and we are inches away from 5G, uh, keeping the aspect apart of the natural impact which it has on the nature and the other stuff. But the amount of communication bandwidth which we have is immense, and what that has done is that has enabled a lot of IoT devices to be streaming on the fly, when compared to the older storage devices, or when older monitoring systems which were working in silos. I think you and most of the other listeners will also be having this in their childhood, that there used to be something called as a water level sensor in their overhead tanks. It used to turn on and it used to turn off. So that was a standalone thing, because it had its own individual sensors. It used to work based on the water levels. It used to detect that, and it used to turn on and off the switch. So this is pretty much simple. Nowadays, these things, when they are getting connected to your internet, So this gives an immense opportunity to optimize the things, to like uh, keep the tank half filled so that it does not increases the weight, or it does not consume more water when compared to the neighbors, or based on your existing family members utilization, try to go ahead with the refills twice in one day, so that you are reducing on your electricity bills and stuff like that. So all these things are actually uh, what I can say, getting implemented because people choose to go with those technologies. Mobile phones, if they were kind of not advantageous, or they were kind of discarded, so the individual compute level aspects which we are having with Snapdragon's 888 series, which is being coming up, so that would not have been possible. So even if you have a technology market, but you don't have enough consumers, that particular single technology is going to perish down the line. So that coming to the older question, how exactly can we say that something is kind of future proof, or what is actually stopping us from AGI, that is going ahead with general intelligence. So these factors or implementation stuff, they have their own sweet spots. Like, you are generating large volumes of data, you have good bandwidth to process or send them across, then you are having huge computes to go through each and everything and make sense out of it. But there needs to be an understanding layer, or the efficiency of the same thing needs to be improvised. So whatever the models which we build in machine learning and with the artificial intelligence, with object recognition, or with any of those factors, how good are we with the transfer learning coming up? So always remember, when you show something to a kid, it is having same amount of kind of storage, or whatever the thing you call in its brain, but there's a humane factor to it, that the child keeps on learning on and on and on. So any individuals, or any of the parents which we know of, so they have learned it over a very long period of time. And jumping into AGI with just with just one decade of data, or with one decade of advancements, I think that would be a huge ask, and that would lead to a lot of expectation losses. So you will be having huge backing on one technology, and it would flat fall flat on its back. So those things can happen at this point as well. But we need to be patient, and we need to optimize on most of the things. The way in which a model is basically going to learn, how optimizing it is going to help, how basically are you going to transfer the learning from one model to another. And I think most of the companies have already figured this out, and they are already investing hugely. With AWS, there is a service called as SageMaker, where uh, you just use one of your calls, like you're using linear regression, you know what exactly it does. And they are opening up their own APIs, so that it is much more advanced, and they do it on the existing model which they have, and they are feeding your data set which you want, and you can go ahead and optimize it. So that's the beauty of it. And if you remember, before 1.5 year, there was a video from AWS coming in saying that a guy has a problem with his cat. It's his cat tries to
I
bring
still
in
remember
dead
that. I
stuff.
still remember that.
Yeah, yeah, that the dead stuff. And what he did is with hardware things, he basically built a camera which detects whether the cat is coming, and if it has an object in its mouth, the door is not going to open. So that's kind of the API calls which it is making, and it is making the models with AWS as well much more efficient and much more learnable. So that is the advantage of transfer learning, which most of these companies are trying to do. So going forward, it might be just a simple call from your program, where you just specify what exact algorithm which you want to implement, either naive Bayes, or if you're going to go with SVM, or whatever the things. And you give the training data set, but the model is already pre-trained. And if you want to make it zero and make it learn from the scratch and give it huge volumes of data, and it will also be available, and it will be the learning method or the decision making methods will also be optimized.
Yeah,
uh,
when you
I,
said
I
this, yeah, you can continue, bro.
Okay, sorry. So what I uh, uh, meant by the last answer is, like, there's no definite answer with where we are going to land up, or what is the expectations and stuff like that. So there's always progress which we are going forward with, and most of the things which we are doing, if they are business driven and if they have the monetary aspects come in, so they would lead to a lot of faster innovations. um, so that's what I had. Sorry, go ahead.
Like when I heard your answer, I felt like it's Jitendra Malik who is talking to me. Because when I heard of his 3 hours Celtics,
Mhm,
because that's the
mhm,
first time that somebody had given out recognition, reconstruction, remodeling, and every other aspect for computer vision required for AGI. And I also got
mhm,
to know one more thing, like if you want 99.99% accuracy, work for 5 years. He had openly said
mhm,
it. He had openly said it. That's what the answer is all about. We are not putting the right amount of hustle. We are not putting the right amount of actual resources in order to get to the place. What's your last question? Let's not
mhm.
ramble, because we know, I know you have answer for everything that I can ask regarding software architecture. Let it be Cloudera, let it be Kafka, let it be anything. You can answer it. But let's just keep it the last one.
Mhm,
What's your view on the present day's engineers work, and what's that X
mhm,
factor that we are losing in order to get the work right? And
mhm,
also, please make sure that none of us are in the way that this is not the approach. What's that
mhm,
thing that you are really thinking this shouldn't be their approach in order to get this solution, or else
mhm,
this work? What's that one
mhm.
thing that you actually pray to God that this engineer should not have this approach in order to get there? Final question.
Okay,
Go for it.
that's a little bit tricky one. So, what I basically expect when I get a candidate for an interview is, at least you should have good communication skills. So that forms a basic one. Even if it can be Kannada, it can be English, it can be Hindi, Marathi, Urdu, whatever the thing is. Unless and until you are able to communicate with the rest of the world, and you are able to express what you have in your mind, that should be good. So with most of the Norwegian countries, or most of the other European countries, so they speak Belarus, they speak France, the French, they speak Spanish, and they, most of the times when we have calls with those kind of customers, they're kind of adamant of not switching on to English when they converse among themselves. So the whole idea is, language is not 100% what I would say immense, but the way in which you communicate, that is what actually matters. You might an excellent chap, you might have all the answers, but without a proper communication skill, it's all in vain. So you will not be able to open up to the world. So that's the first part. And the second one is, when I basically go through the interviews, this happened to me once, and I was asking in questions on Hadoop and big data, and the guy was like, okay, and making all the hand gestures via the WebEx, and later I got a little doubtful, and it was the second guy who was answering, and this guy was just sitting in front of the camera and performing all the actions and the and the monkey stuff. So always, whenever you call a guy for a physical level interview, you will get to know what exactly he is and what exactly he's going to do. So it's always on the advantageous front. uh, Try not to fake. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't. So there's no shame in saying that I don't know. Even I don't know most of the stuff with OpenCV, or with how the exact ANNs work, and it's always a learning curve. The first step is accepting that you don't know. So it's completely fine. In this world, not everyone knows everything. And say something happens in a government office, you might not be knowing because you have never visited it, that you don't have that experience of going over there. So even if you have not coded, or you don't have the complete experience of how the exact things work or how the production environment works, never try to fake it in a interview, because the guy who is sitting in front can be uh, experienced, and they will catch it up in a much more easier way. And even if you lie, and if the guy is not able to make out, and if you get that job as well, but you will have to churn out on a daily basis. So that's not going to happen, like someone else is going to come up and help you up, because everyone has their own shitload of things to take care of. So always remember that no one is going to come to your help. You might be having a relative, or you might be having a closed one or an alliance where they might be helping you out, but that help is going to dry out. So you need to be self-sustained at some point in time. And as I said, never lie on the face and ask them up, like give them too much hype and over expectations. It's always okay to go back to the drawing board and learn new stuff, and come back and say. And that would be dangerous if you ask me, because in the past as well, there were few situations where uh, because of a person's ego, the complete solution was kind of thrown out, and we landed back in square one. So that should not be the case, right? So there cannot be something which is like the best and the full worst. So there can be a middle ground which we can come up with. But scrapping out the entire solution just for ego of a person, or because he lacks the empathy to understand what the other person is saying, so that can be leaving a scar at an engineer's life. Because just imagine, you have been working on this model on an object recognition which does fantastically good, and you take it up to your professor or your mentor, and you show it to them, and instead of giving constructive feedback, they just say, it's a crap, just throw it out of the window. And uh, that's the moment of disheart which you are going to go ahead. So that empathy is something which everyone should have, because everyone is fighting their own battles. So uh, someone might be having aged parents who needs to take care of them, and few of them might be having family issues, few of them might be having financial issues. So you basically don't know. So instead of just throwing stuff at them directly, try to be a little empathetic, and it's gonna go a long way. And it's gonna help to work as a team, as well as to build up that rapport with your colleagues.
Yeah, lot of new stuff and lot of new approaches that we are supposed to give in order to be a best engineer and the best man of ourselves. And thank you,
Mhm.
Akash, brother. It
Yep.
was an amazing podcast that I have never expected a software guy
Mhm.
who has an experience of this sort can accept an invitation of a noob of me and come and give me a podcast. And it was an amazing podcast. Probably this is going to change the rest of the aspects in which the engineering is going to be, because these
Mhm.
are the approaches which we lack because we are behind the marks, not behind the skill. I think skill is going to be the number one criteria that we will be working on from now on. Thank you so much. It was amazing talking to you, brother.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Vishwas. Thanks for your
Yeah,
time,
thank you.
and thanks for having me on the show.